4 years ago. So I hope you'll all join me in welcoming him.
Perfect. Good evening, everyone. Professor Banerjee, the Director of IIT Delhi, Professor Anjali Multani, the Dean of the Office of Diversity and Inclusion, Professor Ritika Khera, Associate Dean of Student Welfare, Professor Yashpal Jogdand, who guides the mental health team, our PhD scholars, Purva Gupta from the Initiative for Gender Equity and Sensitization, Vaibhav Das, representing Indradhanu, and Akashdeep Bansal from the Office of Accessible Education, and the staff and the students of this eminent institution, which recently celebrated its Diamond Jubilee. It's my honor to deliver the inaugural address for the Office of Diversity and Inclusion and get this opportunity to interact with students and professors of IIT Delhi. I have a special reason to be here as well. I grew up in Delhi. I did part of my schooling in Delhi, and of course, I went to college. I went to St. Stephen's, where I studied economics and mathematics, and then I continued to do my law at Campus Law Center. And traveling by the ubiquitous DTC routes, I would pass by IIT when the conductor would normally proclaim that IIT Delhi has arrived. I always looked with a little bit of what could have been at these hallowed halls of IIT, which I never was able to enter, and looked at them with a certain degree of trepidation and awe. And it's with that sense of trepidation and awe with this Hall of Excellence that I've ventured to accept this invitation and speak to you and share some of my thoughts this evening. Today marks really a very special day for all of us as we get a chance to celebrate the 4th anniversary of the Supreme Court's decision in Navtej Singh Johar. While the decriminalization of Section 377 of the Penal Code has enabled queer people to emerge as legally empowered citizens and demand their rights rightfully and proudly, structural changes are still needed to ensure that we are able to extend these positive legal effects to marginalized queer people who continue to face intersecting oppressions. Intersectional discrimination is not something which is only confined to the queer, but certain groups of queer people, due to their caste and class positions, are more susceptible and vulnerable to the abuse of law, both in terms of symbolic and material harm. Discrimination is intersectional in the sense that our identities intersect. The experience of, say, a Dalit blind woman would be very different from the experiences of a Dalit male student, or for that matter, from the experiences who a student from the non-Dalit segment of society, who is or is not visually challenged, would bear in the day-to-day life. So it's these intersectional identities. All of us have different identities. We are an amalgam of a plurality of identities. I don't think any one of us has one singular identity which is definitive of the life which we live or of our experiences. But the much needed first legal step that the Supreme Court was able to take with the decriminalization of homosexuality in Navtej would not have been possible without the stories and the experiences of the petitioners and countless others whom they represented before us. One of the connected petitions was named Anvesh Pokuluri versus Union of India before the Supreme Court. and it comprised of a spirited chorus of 20 students and alumni from various IITs across the country, including IIT Delhi, representing Pravriti, a support group for LGBT members of the IIT fraternity. The youngest petitioner before the court was actually a young 19-year-old student of IIT Delhi. By taking a stand before the court in the Section 377 litigation, students and alumni of IITs helped in building a modern contemporary India, not just by advancing her technical skills, but by taking the country closer to her constitutional values. I must share with all of you that when I got the invite for this inaugural talk, I read and reread the quote which the Office of Diversity and Inclusion had added in their proposal. The line, which is taken from the Navte judgment, says, "Our Constitution, above all, is an essay in the acceptance of diversity. It is founded on a vision of an inclusive society which accommodates plural ways of life." I pondered over what it means for our educational institutions. In my understanding, what it signifies for all our universities and institutes of higher education is that they must look like the India which they represent. If IIT Delhi wants to continue to fulfill its vision of contributing to India's growth through excellence in scientific and technical education and research, of serving as a valuable resource for society, then a diverse, equitable, inclusive, and accessible IIT is needed. As we celebrate 60 years of IIT Delhi and we celebrate the establishment of the Office of Diversity and Inclusion, this may be an appropriate moment to reflect on the transformative possibility of IITs by looking at the intersection of two long-standing concerns of the state: education and social justice. Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar's was a clarion call to educate, agitate, and organize. He repeatedly emphasized the importance of education for the emancipation of the oppressed sections of our society. However, in his address to the Constituent Assembly on 25th November 1949, Dr. Ambedkar also recognized that independent India was entering into a life of contradictions. The functioning of higher education in India, then as of now, represents this contradiction between hope and disappointment, between promoting social mobility and legitimizing existing inequalities in the name of credentials and degrees and merit. The idea of the IITs took shape in the late 1940s when the Sarkar Committee recommended the creation of higher technical educational institutions. In 1956, Jawaharlal Nehru, speaking at the first annual convocation of IIT Kharagpur, believed the IITs to be representing India's urges, India's future in the making. In 1961, the College of Engineering was established and later declared as an institute of national importance. It is now known as the Indian Institute of Technology, Delhi, where we are all gathered. However, Nazir Ahmed, one of the members of the Sarkar Committee, had cautioned against the possibility of institutional isolation of the IITs and feared undemocratic limits to access. One of the criticisms that has been leveled against the IITs is that they have diverted state resources from primary education while remaining islands of excellence. Now, you may not necessarily agree with that criticism or critique. There have been sustained concerns of limited diversity in the IITs. Even as the base of the student body at the undergraduate level has become more diverse, though diverse not enough, questions have been raised time and again regarding the limited representation of gender diverse and marginalized communities in doctoral programs and faculty positions. When we think of the expression science, we tend to think about words like objectivity, merit, excellence, maybe even competitive examinations. But what do these words and phrases actually mean? For the next few minutes, what I want to do is unpack new meanings of old vocabularies with each of you. Excellence is normally understood in individual terms as a sign of individual merit, individual caliber, individual hard work. But by focusing on the individual, we often mark the historically acquired privilege that each of us shares. Over the years, families and communities have acquired different types of capital at different levels: economic capital, cultural capital, and social capital. The privileges that accrue to so called general categories are not limited to English medium schooling, access to coaching centers, but it also includes cultural and social capital that is inherited from their families. In a seminal book which is titled The Caste of Merit, Engineering Education in India by Ajanta Subramaniam, the book relies on the work of sociologist Satish Deshpande to explain how policy terms like general category and reserved category or competitive examinations have mediated to transform caste capital into the modern capital of merit. Professor Deshpande points out the story of how upper castes transform their caste capital into modern capital, which is not very well known. By contrast, Deshpande continues, the political leveraging of caste by the lower castes is a recurrent and publicly debated theme. The result of this asymmetry, as he maintains, is that the upper castes are naturalized as the legitimate inheritors of modernity, while the lower castes are hypervisible as the illegitimate purveyors of caste. People belonging to different genders, regions, castes, and socioeconomic backgrounds, bringing their own unique experiences, ideas, values, and perspectives to bear on the task at hand by asking new questions and seeking unique solutions. As Professor Amartya Sen said, we are diversely different because of the plurality of our identities, which intersect and cut across each other. Diversity is a virtue. It has an intrinsic worth in itself and furthers our understanding of fairness and social justice. It was the diverse student population of the IITs who, with their resilience and fortitude, decided to challenge Section 377 of the Indian Penal Code in our courts. Diversity also leads to positive outcomes in terms of making better scholars, better thinkers, and better citizens. Innovation in science occurs when someone has the courage to ask different questions, look at the problem from different perspectives, and gain new insights. Diversity results in innovative thinking and decision making, and richness in the originality of scholarly thought, learning is impoverished when it happens in groups of like minded people. And the grave danger which intellectuals across our globalized world today face is the danger of sitting in information silos, where we associate only with those who believe like us, who think like us, and who do not look beyond the horizons of that which is familiar. So, diversity enables us to combine doctrine with experiential learning. Doctrine itself, as science will teach you, and as law has taught me, and as social sciences do teach us, doctrine is not really neutral, as our textbooks would like to teach us. Because doctrine embodies within itself ideology, preferences, and a worldview which sometimes protects the dominant or that which lies at the mainstream. Our experiential learning, and I dare say the experiential learning of all of us, whether we are faculty or judges or citizens, our experiential learning is affected by what we contact and combat in our day-to-day lives. So the ability of diversity lies in its potential to transform what we learn in terms of doctrine in these institutions of higher education, of technical excellence, as it transforms us as individuals through experiential learning with others. It was the diverse student population of the IITs, as I said, which combated the stereotypes which are built into Section 377 of the Penal Code. If I may take the liberty to give a personal example, over the years, I've had brilliant law clerks from diverse backgrounds, from different genders, a young Dalit student, castes, classes, regions, and cultural experiences, including students belonging to the LGBTQ community. My interactions with them continue to give me new perspectives, whether it is through the suggestion of a new movie or book, or by actively seeking new solutions to old problems. For example, one of my clerks from the batch of 2020-21 gave me an insight into the various issues of governance that people with disabilities face in their daily lives. In our own office, we ensured that the scanned case files we received were OCR readable. Steps were taken to change the visual capture on the Supreme Court of India website to an audio-visual capture, making it more accessible. When I dealt with a case of a young, blind Dalit girl who had been subjected to rape, and when the perpetrator was charged with a crime punishable under Section 376, I learned deeply from the experiential learning which one of my very dynamic young Dalit judicial clerks had brought to the table in our discussions over the year that he spent in engaging with me. I use these examples to show that difference and diversity need to be understood for their uniqueness, which is a resource rather than a liability. From my own judicial clerks who have been members of the LGBTQ community and their friends, I've understood what really happens in society across us. And that enables us to live more fuller, more richer lives as individuals as we transform the lives of others. In other words, we need to recalibrate how we understand our old vocabularies and realize that diversity and excellence actually complement and reinforce each other. to go back to one of my older judgments, the way we understand merit should not be limited to individual agency or ability, which in any event is not our sole or own doing, but it should be envisioned as a social good that advances equality, because that is the value which our Constitution espouses. It is important to note that equality here does not merely have a redistributive dimension, but also includes recognizing the worth and dignity of every individual. The content of merit cannot be devoid of what we value in our society. Excellence, like life itself, is enriched by diversity. When we talk of diversity, we need to bear in mind that it should exist at three levels. First, diversity must exist in terms of structural diversity, in terms of the composition of the people at the educational institution. Second, diversity in the classrooms and in the teaching resources of our higher institutions. And third, interactional diversity in terms of how inclusive the higher educational institute is to facilitate interactions across diverse groups. Just as technology must have within it the ability to converse with each other at diverse levels, so also we must have the ability to converse, accept, and respect each other and be accepting of the views of each other. On rare occasions, when students are able to cross the structural barriers and struggle against immense odds to enter institutes of higher education, their toughest battle begins inside the institutes of higher education. An institute which is only diverse but which is not inclusive imposes additional burdens on students due to their stigmatized identities. Instances of campus discrimination, microaggressions, social exclusion, feelings of a lack of connectedness, or support from peers and mentors can all have a pernicious impact on the dignity and mental health of students. Social justice cannot be restricted to access alone, but substantive inclusion is needed in higher educational institutes which promotes meaningful social and academic interactions with the larger campus community, including professors, administrators, staff, and peers. I would like to recount the story of Prince Jaibir Singh, a young Dalit student who traveled from Allahabad, now Prayagraj, to Kharagpur, to Mumbai, and ultimately to the Supreme Court in Delhi. Having been allocated a seat in civil engineering at IIT Mumbai, a technical error made Jaibir Singh miss his acceptance fee deadline. He moved the court to allow him to pay the acceptance fee and to facilitate his admission to IIT. Sitting with my colleague Justice A.S. Bopanna, we invoked the Supreme Court's extraordinary power under Article 142 of the Constitution and directed the state to ensure that the bright young student was admitted to IIT Bombay. Special steps in this particular case were necessary since, due to the digital divide and limited resources, technology became an impediment instead of being a great enabler. Jaibir didn't have money to pay the acceptance fee. He had borrowed some money from his sister, but the credit card didn't really give him support at the last minute. Similarly, intentional initiatives aimed at promoting integration in higher education are needed. When purposive initiatives like the Office of Diversity and Inclusion are undertaken, it translates into putting into work, setting goals, timelines, earmarking resources, and seeing what more needs to be done to make it work. The work undertaken by the Office of Diversity and Inclusion, whether it is by providing assistive technologies, holding gender sensitization workshops, initiating conversations through movies like Fundray, providing formal recognition and institutional support to a decade-old initiative like Indradhanu, or organizing remedial and education support programs. This work is the first step forward in the long journey towards the IIT's role in furthering social justice. There is much to be done in the project of realizing diversity, fully integrating diverse communities, different along a number of intersecting dimensions, including gender, class, caste, religion, and culture, both in the Indian society and in our higher educational institutions. As I take your leave, I leave you with the words of Paulo Freire, a Brazilian educator and philosopher who believed that pedagogy can function as an instrument for political resistance. And he said, and I quote, "The oppressor is solidary with the oppressed only when he stops regarding the oppressed as an abstract category and sees them as persons who have been unjustly dealt with, deprived of their voice, cheated in the sale of their labor, when he stops making pious, sentimental, and individualistic gestures and risks an act of love. True solidarity is found only in the plenitude of this act of love, in its existentiality, in its praxis. To affirm that men and women are persons, and as persons should be free, and yet do nothing tangible to make this affirmation a reality, is a farce," he says. Once again, I would like to congratulate the director of IIT Delhi and the dean of the Office of Diversity and Inclusion, and wish the students, the faculty, and the staff all the best. I cannot wait to see the strides that IIT Delhi will make towards making differences matter. Thank you very much for inviting me this evening.
Okay, so actually we hadn't planned for any questions, but Justice Chandrachud has kindly agreed, and I know at least one or two students had emailed me asking about this. So if you have a question or two, can I ask you to quickly run up to the stage? Please come forward. Yeah, please don't ask about cases that are currently in the court. Yeah, just a second. I think there's a student with Vaibhav. Can you give him the mic? Thank you. Why don't you also come ahead and then you can be next. Introduce yourself.
Okay. Myself is Devaraj. I'm coming from JNU. I'm a research scholar. I'm doing my PhD in teachers' professional development, particularly special educators. So Justice Chandrachud, I have two set of questions. So one, actually, as we look around the research suggests that there is a major problem lies with the implementation of the policy. As we know, most of the IITs are not implemented the reservation policy, both in their faculty recruitment and the PhD scholars recruitment. So what is your comment on this? The second is, with regard to the disability, if you see, when I was looking around the policy documents and of course some literature on that, I found that usually the legal fraternity has very limited awareness on the provisions which are available for the persons with disabilities. So I would like to hear from you about this also. The last question, actually, I'm so sorry, I told two, but I have the third question also.
Wait. Let others, let's be fair to the
This
others.
is last one, so I will not take more than 40 seconds. So the last question is, uh, actually, as you shared most of the experiences, Dalit girl and Dalit student, and the recent case regarding IIT Mumbai and all. So actually, most of the people don't even resources and knowledge to approach justice system. So, what is your comment on this? These three things. Thank you.
Thank you. Why don't you ask? Let's collect two or three questions and then maybe you can. Yeah.
Uh, Thank you, sir. I have two small questions. My first one being Ambedkar.
Louder.
So my first question is, like, sir, Dr. Ambedkar was a genius. He always talked about caste elimination rather than caste equality. So how do you think that we can actually eliminate the caste as a construct from a society? Because as long as the construct and concept of caste will exist, there will always be inequality at some level. And when the concept is actually indoctrinated in religion, so how can we actually eliminate the construct of caste? And the second thing is that like reservations have always been there for 75 years. How do you think that we as a country can work for the upliftment of the backwards, but also being a meritorious state at the principal level? So that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Would anyone else like? How can we combine?
How can we be a meritorious state and work as the upliftment at the same time? Thank you. My name is
Okay.
Himanshu.
Thank you. Would you like to do one round of answers, or should we take one or two more?
Good evening.
Okay. So just one more.
Good evening,
Maybe this
Honorable
time it
Justice.
can be a female student. Hey, wait. Huh. Yeah, is there one? Thank you. Please go ahead.
Good evening, everyone. Am I audible?
Yes.
So, I am Nidhi, PhD research scholar at chemistry department here. So, my one question is from Justice Chandrachud that what I feel is justice is very subtle. So, like, how do you like what I think is in like while doing the justice there's some human biases, so how do you remove that human bias while delivering the kind of judgments you have given and in the future also? So this is my question. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Amazing questions. And I have to bring together in answering these questions, I think lifelong experiences and of what I've combated in law and life, both at a personal and professional level. First question was that there is this chasm between policy and the implementation of policy. Uh, for instance, the example was that there's a dearth of PhD scholars, of faculty drawn from Dalits particularly. So, what's my response to that? Well, I think this divide between law and social reality is one of the very fundamental problems which of our social life which confronts us every day in our life as judges. I'm not only going to answer this perspective from the point of view of a judge that I happen to be, but there is this wide chasm between the ideals that the law represents, and policy is therefore a facet of law because policy has to be consistent with law, and what social reality is. In so many which ways, the law is either ahead of social reality or it is behind social reality, it is catching up. So there are two different facets. Now, I think the answer to your question, it's a very deeply philosophical question, but I'll try and answer it in just a bit so that we can move on to the next uh, question. I think the task of realizing rights is not just a task of realizing rights by using legal instruments, but by engagement of the community in the realization of rights. And very often we look too much or depend too much on legal institutions in the realization of rights, which is not to say that legal institutions do not have a very positive impact on the realization of rights. But legal institutions are necessarily constrained by issues which are brought to the courts. There's a great potential, I do believe, for the engagement of the community in creating awareness. And it's this sense of community awareness which I think which would enable greater achievement of the policy objectives. For instance, I'll give you one example. Uh, Professor Shamnath Bashir uh, began this movement, the IDEA Initiative, in the National Law Schools, of bringing into the mainstream of training students from underprivileged backgrounds, giving them a certain degree of social importance, or putting them in the limelight, and then ensuring that they transform into very important positions of responsibility. Uh, Seed, there's another initiative called Seed, which is also trying to bring Dalit students into the mainstream in the legal profession. So I think these are examples which can be replicated across various different social platforms, not just in terms of what's happening in medicine or law, but take it across society by bringing greater community awareness on the realization of rights. The second question, I think, which is that the legal profession has very limited awareness about social problems. Now, it's ironical that you say that, because in that sense, the legal profession is really a profession which is in very deep connect with the grassroots of society, where injustice takes place on the ground, so to speak. The problem, I think, which the legal profession just does face is the problem of a certain intellectual isolation, because you tend to believe that law as a discipline is an end in itself. And I think that's one of the grave dangers, because when you forget that the law has a deep connect with social reality, you forget the potential for the law to transform. So the answer to your question is, how do you deal with this? And my answer is very simple: broaden the base as opposed to focusing on the pyramid. When we broaden the base of the profession, I think that will be a very key. And broadening the base means encouraging people from diverse backgrounds, social, economic, cultural, caste, gender, to enter the profession. And I think that will lead to better awareness. The third question was the lack of awareness of common citizens in approaching justice. And how do you combat this? Well, the lack of awareness may be due to a variety of circumstances. We all know it. Could be due to just the lack of literacy, because of caste domination, gender domination, for a variety of reasons. I think there's a very simple answer to that. The colonial system which we inherited was based on this model that citizens must access justice. And therefore, you look at the design of all the heritage buildings which we have. The heritage design of most of our colonial buildings is somewhere where the citizen reaches out to somebody in power. I think that design thinking has to change. I was talking of, the physical design of the courtroom structures, but I'm going beyond the physical design into a more symbolic design in terms of the design thinking that we want to bring into our institutions, which is our institutions of governance must reach out to citizens. And I think technology has that within us. And the potential of technology today is that it can, instead of having a model where those who desire justice have to seek out justice, technology would enable us to reach out to those who need justice by transforming them. For instance, just this afternoon, in the court, I had a case of 512 life convicts from the state of Uttar Pradesh. Since I've just delivered the order, I can speak about it. So these 512 convicts are serving life sentences for very serious offenses. Now, many of them have put in 25, 30 years, 35 years in jail without any remission. Most of them belong to the most under-resourced and stigmatized segments of our society. So today, for instance, we said in our order that it's not enough that because these 512 have come to the court that their cases for premature release should be dealt with. But we must now be in a position where we will access every individual who is incarcerated in the jail in that particular state and ensure that if they're eligible for premature release, we must reach out to them and provide all the resources necessary for them to apply for premature release. So that model has to change of reaching out to people as opposed to making people, search in vain for where justice lies. The next question was, how do we eliminate caste? Without meaning any disrespect to the question, I just want to say this, that this whole theme that caste must be eliminated is very often perceived to be a theme which the upper caste propagate. Because it is the upper caste who believe that caste is one of the most pernicious features of our Indian society. You talk to people who have been subject to discrimination, to stigmatization, to assault on grounds of caste. Caste defines their identities, and every day of their lives they are reminded of their caste by the perpetrators of those who practice discrimination against them on the grounds of caste. So I think that the true answer to that question must lie in this. And the answer is not to make a casteless society, but to enable those who have been subject to centuries of discrimination. And that discrimination still continues, as we just heard several examples from day to day lives. The answer to that must lie in our being aware of the extent of discrimination on the grounds of caste, which still is perpetrated in our society today. That we must come face to face with that discrimination which still permeates and pervades our society, and to find justice to those who are discriminated on grounds of caste. I think that is far more important than anything else. Uh, the next question was, how do you draw the balance between upliftment and merit? There again, the question has an underlying assumption that upliftment and merit are two ends of a conflicting spectrum. That if you have to uplift, you have to sacrifice merit. If you have to emphasize merit, then of necessity, you have to ignore upliftment. I have a problem with that sort of paradigm. My simple answer is, how do you balance upliftment and merit? Very simple. You just need to redefine merit. How can you define merit only in terms of, say, how do you define merit only in terms of test scores in the examinations? How do you only define merit in terms of entrance tests? Would somebody who scores much better in, say, the CLAT examination, the common law aptitude test, does somebody who scores much higher than somebody else, will that define the potential of that student to become a more responsible citizen or to contribute better to society 20 or 30 years down the line? So I think we need to redefine our notions of merit. That inclusion itself has a very positive element in defining merit. And so when we redefine merit in terms of a more inclusive, in terms of a more plural society, a society which truly represents India as it stands today, you would really speak of true upliftment and not then treat upliftment and merit as lying on a dichotomy or on two opposing ends of the spectrum. And the last question, of course, which was extraordinarily interesting, which is when you do justice or when you are in a court of law and you have human biases, well, how do you confront those human biases? Well, on a very theoretical level, at a very theoretical level, you're told that the law is objective, that the law is uniform, that it applies equally to everyone. But when you enter the actual practice of law, the practice of judging, you realize that there is no such thing as an abstract law. The law, as I said a short while ago, doctrine itself is not objective. Doctrine itself suffers from all the asymmetries which you find in society. Because doctrine itself is, in that sense, formulated by the products of that asymmetry in society. Just as we know that algorithms are not all that asymmetrical. So I think part of the issue about good judging, and this may be just I'm speaking from my own experience, and don't take it as gospel truth, because I'm sure there are different paths to achieving the same objective, is that the important thing first and foremost is to be aware of your own biases, where you come from. That's very important, because when you confront your own biases and you're not afraid of your own biases, that tells you your own potential to overcome your own biases. So awareness, I believe, is first and foremost extraordinarily important. The second is exposure. I think the greatest learning that you have is from the exposure of others around you who teach you. And one of the problems which all of us today feels is that we feel we know everything that there is to learn. Because that's what the age of information technology tries to tell you, that everything, all the information that you need is at the click of a mouse. It's not necessarily so, because there's some vision which lies beyond information. And that vision, that knowledge which lies beyond information, you really gather from your association. And it is in the multiplicity of association, not with like-minded people, but people who do not necessarily think like you, people who do not necessarily dress like you, people who do not necessarily believe like you, or people who do not agree with you. That gives you better perspectives. Speaking for myself, our dining table, for instance, is a conversation between a very feminist spouse who very often doesn't think like me or agree with me. But in that, I believe, there is a great deal of learning in that process of dialogue which takes place. And finally, and that's the most important, which is never to be judgmental about the lives of others. And this not really applies only to a judge, but I think to each one of us, that too very often we tend to judge others. Oh, he is like this, or she is like that. We never wait for a moment and ask ourselves the question, why is he like this, or why is she like that, and why am I like this? I think the important thing about whatever profession we are in, and I dare say this is true about science, the social sciences, is the importance of not being judgmental about others, about just letting others be, and allow others to lead their own lives and learn how enriching it is, because others live lives in ways very different from the ways in which we live our lives.
Okay. So I think we're going to call it a day. I'd like to invite Professor Anjali Multani, the Dean for the Office of Diversity and Inclusion, to come and give a vote of thanks.
Thank you. Thanks, Ritika. So the Beatles seems to be the theme. So, I mean, Justice Chandrachud could have just said, let it be at the end, and it would have served the purpose. But formally, my name is Anjali Multani. I'm the new Dean of Diversity and Inclusion, and I'm beginning to really get worried at the sheer mammoth task that seems to lie ahead. But I'm also extremely encouraged by the number of people from the community who have stepped up and come to attend this event. And I hope you will be there throughout every other endeavor of the Office of Diversity and Inclusion. It is it's very fitting that the new office of the Dean of Diversity and Inclusion at IIT be inaugurated by Justice D.Y.Chandrachud, and we are very grateful to him for taking out the time to grace us with his presence. This office would not have come into being without the initiative, hard work, and commitment, first and foremost, of Professor Ritika Khera, and the support of our administration at IIT, notably the former director, Professor Ram Gopal Rao, our current DDSNP, Professor Ganguly, and our director, Rangan Banerjee. Also, all the faculty, staff, and students who are advisors who have worked tirelessly on the different verticals that comprise this office. There are too many to name here, but who have made vital contributions this entire year and today. Student organizations, BSW, BSP, very, very hard work. Thank you very much. Well begun is half done is the very common saying, and with the contribution of Justice Chandrachud and with his notable and crucial judgments on privacy, personal liberty, sexual harassment in the workplace, intersectional violence, gender discrimination in the armed forces, and the right to not just freedom in different aspects of life, but the right to dignity in those aspects, makes it a most positive and inspirational beginning for the cause of diversity, accessibility, and inclusion on campus. A diverse campus will benefit everyone. It fosters emotional intelligence, creative thinking, sensitivity to differences, and open communication. Intersectionalities are a part of all our identities and experience, and I do hope this office will foster a spirit of equality and commitment and making the space safe for everyone. Once again, I thank the Justice for sharing his time and thoughts with us and hope to have many more interactions with him on our campus. Thank you very much.